Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrell, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
Welcome to the Workology Podcast. It's a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. I'm so excited to be here chatting with you. This episode of the Workology Podcast is part of our Future of Work series, which is powered by PETE, the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology. PETE works to start conversations around how emerging workplace technology trends are impacting people with disabilities. This podcast is powered by ACE the HR Exam and Upskill HR. These are two of the courses that Workology offers for certification prep and recertification for HR leaders. Before I introduce our guest today, I do want to hear from you. Please comment podcast on the pinned post over on my Instagram account. It's at Workology Blog, where you can ask questions, leave comments, and make suggestions for future guests. You know I want to hear from you. I'm so excited to continue our conversation around inclusion and artificial intelligence. It is a buzzword. That AI conversation is happening everywhere. And today I'm joined by Dr. Cari Miller, founder and head of AI governance and research of the Center for Inclusive Change in the AI Procurement Lab. She's also the vice chair of the IEEE P3119 Working Group, a globally recognized expert in AI procurement. Dr. Miller has started 5 companies, working with some of the largest brands in the world, and has built a loyal following of those who share her passion for equality in the workplace and in the STEM community. She earned her bachelor's degree in international studies, an MBA in marketing and communications, and has a doctorate in business administration and AI governance and risk management from Wilmington University. She focuses on AI governance best practices relative to workplace and EdTech AI. Cari, welcome to the Workology Podcast. So excited to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
I love that you focus on AI and workplace, which is why I'm just so excited, because there's so many good things I think we're going to cover today. Tell me a little bit about your background and how you got involved in work around AI and inclusion.
Well, first of all, I cannot get enough of this space. So it is a pure passion, curiosity. I just wake up and I'm like, what did we do today? So when you love what you do, it's not work. That is exactly how I feel about this. You covered the basics of my background. I've spent a couple of decades as a corporate strategist working on organizational design and process engineering and digital transformation and change management. And I did a tour of duty through government contracting for about 5 years, which was fascinating. But all that time, I was kind of surrounded by algorithms and big data, even through the early 2000s. Like, we had fraud detection, we had supply chain optimization, we had marketing algorithms, and so on. And I loved it. I've always loved that part of my work. But it was the marketing algorithms that woke me up to this need for inclusion. So like early on, companies like Google and Facebook, you could see that they were using the same algorithms to deliver content and ads to people based on like really sensitive characteristics of people. Which meant that they were basically perpetrating systemic biases. So like in an advertising scenario, you'd get the same, people would get the same kinds of ads for like dog food and high heels, as they would use the same algorithm to deliver ads for secretary jobs and CEO jobs. So you can imagine how that might play out. Not fair. So I did not like that. And so when I entered my doctorate program, I just decided maybe figuring out how to fix that should be my research focus. And I haven't looked back. I love it.
Well, I'm so glad that that's where your passion lies. And we're talking today about artificial intelligence and the intersection with the workplace. I wanted to ask how AI is being used in the workplace today, and then maybe we can talk about the role that AI governance can play in its safe use.
Yeah, well, we don't have that much time, but let me give you some of the highlights, right? So I love blending this history of my work with AI curiosity and the passion to fix like unfair things. So I started looking at AI in the workplace, and oh my gosh, I was just blown away at how much AI is already in the workplace, and we're just getting started with AI. So I'm not talking about just Chat GPT, which everybody's using. It's so much more than that. It's kind of like all of a sudden it's everything everywhere all at once. There's AI in hiring. We all know that. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But there's also AI in onboarding and benefit selection and scheduling and clocking in and time management and allocating tasks to people and setting up goals for people and tracking productivity and promotions and succession plans and layoff planning and like approving PTO and figuring out how people should be disciplined and terminated. It's like everywhere across the whole employment spectrum. So you can imagine like how much governance we need for all of that. AI is not one of those like set it and forget it tools like you might have with Microsoft Office. You just install it and there it is. AI is I always say AI is like a toddler. You cannot take your eyes off of it. It has to be watched. And so if it's doing something bad, you have to tell mom or whoever's in charge, this thing did something bad. And if it's really bad, maybe it kind of needs a timeout because, AI can really cause harm. And it should never go into the bathroom with you. Like there's some fundamentals about AI that we need to just keep in mind. And so when we think about governance, of like how to make sure that these things are safe for us, we have to think about it's just common sense. Like, what's our privacy looking like? And is this impacting our well being? And have we set up accommodations appropriately? Are we capturing the incidents that it's having? And are we dealing with people that need that incident resolved? And do we have the ability to like turn it off? So those are just a few things to think about when we think about AI in the workplace, but it's everywhere.
I'm always a little surprised because people don't think that it's everywhere, and it is baked into every piece of HR technology in some form. I think a lot of folks just kind of heard about AI with ChatGPT coming on the scene, but when you think about like applicant tracking systems and job matching and all those different technologies that exist that have existed currently, that is AI.
Yes, it very much is.
So it's already here and it's been here, but now there's more of a spotlight on artificial intelligence and particularly how it can be used for good and not necessarily for bad, but different ways that could be concerning for its use in the workplace. So I want to talk a little bit about this inclusive hiring framework. And Pete, which powers this podcast itself, launched this AI and inclusive hiring framework. And we had an earlier podcast episode, which I'll also link to in the show notes. But I wanted to ask you, how can our HR audience really use that AI and inclusive hiring framework starting today? Where can they get started with that?
Right. So first of all, I want to say congratulations to the entire team that worked on this framework. The Inclusive Hiring Framework just won the 2025 Project Award from Zero Project, which is a UN convention focused on the rights of persons with disabilities. So that is a pretty big deal. And we are pretty excited about that. So, huge congratulations to the team on that. So, that should tell us right away that this is a legitimate, well constructed, well thought through framework. It's recognized internationally. And so, how do you get started on it? Well, first of all, the reason I think it got recognized, my personal opinion on it is so approachable. And that's what I think HR needs to understand. I feel like HR has been in this like whirlwind of AI quote unquote opportunities. There are just so many vendors claiming to have AI solutions that solve their problems. And there's like this feeling by some HR folks they're just overwhelmed and they just don't really know kind of where to turn and where to start. And the framework is a really, really good start because it's just a well-written, it's in plain and simple language with really down to earth things to do and recognize, when you're buying these solutions in the hiring process. So they broke it down in like 10 focus areas, all common sense. When you look at them, you're like, yep, those all make perfect sense. But when you dig in, there are just these great little nuggets of really thoughtful and insightful things that can just really make sure you don't end up with a solution that limits who you end up hiring, right? So that's the goal. And it's not an all or nothing thing. That's the other part I love about this framework. It's not like you have to do all of it in order to gain the full benefit. You can literally create a roadmap that works for you. Like, how much resources do you have to apply to this? Not very many. Okay, just take one step. How much time do you have? Okay, this is going to be a 3-year horizon. No problem. So it's modular, it's readable. That's, you just kind of start by reading sentence 1, really, and you'll get stuff out of it.
That's what I love about this framework in particular. It's very straightforward, and why I'm so excited that we're continuing to talk about it here. And frankly, I personally don't feel like it's getting enough movement and conversations happening in the HR space. Everybody's all about AI, but we really need to look at this from an inclusive hiring lens and use lens when it comes to the workplace.
Agreed.
Let's take a reset. This is Jessica Miller-Merrell, and you're listening to the Workology Podcast, sponsored by ACE the HR Exam and Upskill HR. Today, we are talking with Dr. Cari Miller, founder of the Center for Inclusive Change. This podcast on Workology is powered by our partners, Pete. It's the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology, and this particular interview is part of our Future of Work series. Thank you, Pete. Love partnering with you. Now let's get back to the podcast with Dr. Cari Miller. Let's talk about some key best practices when it comes to AI governance that you can suggest companies try to adopt, especially when we're thinking about HR and education technology.
Okay, great question. Everyone seems to get overwhelmed with this thought because it's like, oh, do I have to do everything or nothing will work? That's not true. You don't have to do everything. Baby steps. Baby steps is all we need to do. That's how we're going to get started. Just one step at a time, then another. And then before you know it, you've got like a thing going, right? So we want to prioritize any one of the 10 focus areas in the framework. You can prioritize any one of them and you'll be further ahead than you were before, right? And so that's much better than doing no focus areas. So personally, I think it's important to do an inventory of your AI, which is kind of a pretty quick project, frankly. You just need to know like what AI do you have? Let's just write it all down. Let's just keep a spreadsheet of what the AI is. Trust me, you'll thank yourself later when something like blows up in the news and you're like, oh, is that part of what we have? Like, just do yourself that favor and just write it all down. But after that, I think the next most important thing, or rather, let me say it this way, the next most impactful thing would be focus area 4, which is working with your vendors. This is where you and your vendors can work out to make sure things are not off the rails, right? So here's why working with your vendors is really important. The first thing you do is to make sure that whatever the solution is actually meets a legitimate business need. And you want to be cautious that I feel like HR people are getting bombarded with all these opportunities to do free pilots and just test it for 30 days or 60 days or 6 months. And by then you're like, oh, okay, I guess we'll just keep doing it. Well, when you do that, you might not have asked all the right questions. And you might not even know if it's a legitimate business purpose. Like maybe it just added more time to your day. So if you just pause and make sure you evaluate the root cause you're trying to solve and make sure that AI is the right solution for it and that AI is the right solution, you could do yourselves a lot of favor. Now, I do agree with pilots. Like after you do figure out I do have this problem, then a pilot is very, very appropriate with good rules around it. Like we'll test it, but then we need feedback to make sure it worked well. The second part of why I think focus area 4 is really good is it sort of gives you the idea to define your requirements up front very carefully, which is a great team sport. No HR person should do this alone. You really just should not feel like you're alone in this. And so a couple of things that the framework highlights, particularly when it comes to inclusive design on these types of systems. AI is notoriously problematic, I'll say, when it comes to anything related to biometric, emotional, or behavioral analytics. When those features are present in the AI, your spidey sense should go up and you should ask a whole bunch of questions. Did you test it? Did you have stakeholders involved in what you're doing? And the second part is privacy. Not just data privacy, we've all heard that, but personal privacy. Like I said, it's a toddler. It shouldn't be following you into the bathroom. Like what, if you have a system that's monitoring your productivity and you step away to go to the bathroom, well, if you're a wheelchair assisted individual, it might take you a little longer to use facilities. That system can track how long you're away from your desk and, cause problems later with a review. Well, you're away from your desk more than other people. So those are the kinds of things that you want to make sure you define your requirements when you're working with vendors up front. Sorry for the long-winded answer, but I had a lot to say on that one.
No, I think this is a really important focus area because HR and IT are so involved in the technology acquisition or sales process, like adoption process, bringing in a new payroll system or a new scheduling system or a new learning management system. So just for a quick overview, focus area 4, which Dr. Miller is talking about, is called Work with Responsible AI Vendors. And this document, the whole framework, is very robust. There's hyperlinks to all the things, but it is over 86 pages long. So focus area 4 is a huge priority. I also agree for HR people, and that is making sure that we are working and partnering with responsible AI vendors. So it kind of maps out how to develop your procurement policies, how to identify some risks, and maybe some different risk controls, all things that we should be thinking about when we're bringing in technology into our organization, but especially as it relates to artificial intelligence.
Right. That's why I think that one has a lot of impact. So there are a lot of, all 10 of them are great, but that one in particular has some specific impact.
Yeah, and I think it's something that we can look at straight away and have a conversation with all the different departments, people, stakeholders in our organizations that are involved in the buying process for technology, IT, the executive team, HR, recruiting, whoever else, the CFO and the finance team, to really think and talk and have an open conversation about AI use and the adoption process, and then how to make sure that we're selecting vendors and partners that really have the best interest for ourselves as an employer, but for the entire future development of AI and all this technology that's taking place.
Exactly.
Personally, I find that there are a lot of HR technologies that are not inclusive. The sales deck is slick, the conversation sound good, but when you really dig into things, they are not thinking about inclusivity first. They're thinking about it after the fact. It's sort of a Band-Aid approach versus building it into the existing technology.
Yeah. And you know what? One thing I always look for when I'm talking with startups and things like that, I always look for, is this the company run and led by people who have worked in that field as part of their career? They've got 10 years in, 20 years in, being a recruiter or working in the learning and development space. Or is the company run by IT engineers who had an idea? There, when you start comparing and contrasting those two different types of companies, you will immediately see the disparity in how the core functionality of the technology works.
As you're saying this, I'm thinking ding, 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 ding,
Yeah.
ding, ding. Like, this is huge because I do see there's a lot of people entering the HR technology space, and they don't necessarily have an understanding. They come from a technical background, but they don't understand our obligations, particularly in the U.S., as a result of employment laws, the requirements for things like OFCCP, all these different employment laws. They're just like, hey, somebody told me, or I identified this, or our
Yeah.
investment angel investor said this was a good space for us to go in, but they don't have the knowledge or access to an expert to help bring them into a space where they are thinking inclusivity first.
Exactly. And someone who has walked in your shoes knows that.
That is why I love, love, love supporting HR technology companies that are founded or have a co-founder who has a background in human resources
Yep.
or in, a space and with a background like yours. Not that there's many of you, unfortunately. Like, it would be great to clone you like 10 times over. But because I would love to have people with your level of expertise in those spaces and places that are going to really make a difference.
Yeah.
I know this topic is massive. We could talk all day and all night for, I don't know, probably 2 years straight and still not have covered everything. But I think that we in HR tend to think of AI in the context of the hiring process, because that's kind of the first phase. And I think an area that we're most used to. I've talked about this a couple times. How can you tell us a little bit about how this technology can help people with disabilities, not just in the hiring process, but throughout the employment life cycle?
Yeah, we don't get to talk about this very much. I'm a risk manager, so I always talk about the doom and gloom and how do we make sure we avoid that. But this side of the coin of AI is really, really exciting. Um, so we already have had screen readers for a long time, and we have captions and transcriptions, and those things are real time now, which is like mind boggling how that works. So those are exciting, and they help individuals navigate websites and systems and participate more in meetings and communicate better. But we're also seeing like voice assistants that'll help you, remember things, and they'll check in with you and help remind you to do check-ins. Readability assistants can help you improve your professional writing. One of my favorites is a tone assistant, where it's a two-way thing, right? So maybe you write in a certain way and people misinterpret your tone, or when you're reading something, you have an impairment where you're not interpreting the tone as it should be. And so these types of AI assistants can help you interpret tone uh, in the way it may have been intended. And then the note takers, I have a love-hate relationship with note takers, but they can be very helpful in extracting what were my to-dos from that 2-hour meeting we just had. What was I supposed to do? And were there any like due dates on that stuff? And within a couple of seconds, the AI can tell you, yes, here are your to-dos. I'm going to schedule them for you. We're going to work through your calendar. So this whole space is exploding. I mean, there's assistive, chairs, and there are just all kinds of stuff around the office and physical embodiment things. And yeah, there's a lot. I'm excited.
There is. And as somebody with ADHD, I love those. I mean, I also have a love hate, but I really do. I love it when I really need it to review or get an overview or say, hey, can you pull out the key points? Because sometimes my ADHD brain fixates on something completely irrelevant, which wasn't the priority. And then that's all that I can pull from the conversation. So these kind of tools are incredibly helpful. I do feel like with more focus on inclusive technology and technology that assists people with disabilities throughout their employment life cycle, we will have more conversations about the ADA process and what that looks like. And so I will put some resources, particularly in the area of Ask Jan, which is my favorite go-to resource when I'm looking at reasonable accommodations and what that might look like for different people. But just know that as this tech evolves, we should be thinking more about making sure that everybody has access to the tools and resources, and in very unique and different ways.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, I really want everyone to check out your work and also check out the AI and inclusive hiring framework. I will include a link to that information as well as more details about Pete. Dr. Miller, where can people go to learn more about you and the work that you're doing?
I live my life on LinkedIn as much as I probably shouldn't, but I do. So I'd say LinkedIn is probably the best. I'm at Cari-Miller. It's Cari-Miller.
It's tough when we have a sort of popular last name, Miller.
Yeah.
But the only probably Dr. Cari Miller, I would think, on LinkedIn. We'll include a link to her particular profile on our show notes as well. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I hope that if you could get one thing from this conversation, pick up and take a look at the AI and inclusive hiring framework. It really will help guide you and bring you in to leveraging HR technology and really having a inclusive mindset as you are beginning to work with different HR technology tools and various vendors that you come across in your work, especially during this busy technology acquisition timeframe. So thank you so much, Dr. Miller, for your time too.
Thank you for having me.
I loved this conversation. The message here is, if you have not looked at the AI and inclusive hiring framework, please run, don't walk, head on over and take a look. So many great resources to help you get started thinking not only about AI selection and HR technology selection, but how you can ensure that you're being inclusive in the technology that you bring into your workplace. Technology can be a bridge or it can be a fence. AI, artificial intelligence, has come a long way, not in just the past decade, but really in the last 24 months. We see it everywhere. Career sites with chatbots and automated emails from our ATS. When we create candidate assessment tools, it's the grocery store checkout, but for HR. Do you love that? As with any other tech, we use it to make our jobs easier. And I love that. It is also important to ensure that the technology aligns with our company culture and goals around diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. I really appreciate Dr. Cari Miller's insights and expertise on this special podcast episode with Pete, part of our Future of Work series. Thank you for listening. Thanks to Dr. Cari Miller, and thank you to Pete. I love partnering with you. If you have specific questions or want to learn more, head on over to the show notes of this podcast, where I have a ton of great resources that you can pick up to learn more about how to be inclusive with your HR technology and AI, which we know they're together forever. Thank you for listening to the Workology Podcast. My name's Jessica Miller-Merrell. Workology is a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. If you're interested in listening to more episodes, we have over 400. Head on over to workology.com, and I will see you next time.